Holidays, Hermes Press fans. This is Dan Herman, publisher of Hermes Press, bringing you a very special book that is one of my personal favorites for this year and has been a book that I've wanted to do for over 30 years. It is Sky Masters of the Space Force by none other than the king of comics, Jack Kirby, with inks by Wallace Wood and later by Dick Ayers, and with inks by Jack Kirby. This is a very important comic strip for a number of reasons. Jack Kirby did it. That's one reason it's important. The other reason it's important is because it bridges the period between when Jack Kirby was having problems after the Comics Code, Mainline Comics, the company that he owned with Joe Simon, had gone under due to distribution issues. He was freelancing with different publishing companies. And he found a home at DC Comics doing, among other things, Challengers of the Unknown, which was a project that he had taken with him when he broke up his relationship with Joe Simon. You'll see as I go through a discussion of Sky Masters of the Space Force that there are similarities between the characters in terms of the way they look and their personalities and some of the Challengers of the Unknown. And later on, when Jack began to work for Marvel and Stan Lee, it's very clear that Ben Grimm is based on characters in one of the characters in Challengers of the Unknown, as well as Sergeant Riot in Sky Masters of the Space Force. The look of the character is the same. Many of the personality characteristics are the same. And remember, Marvel fans and Jack Kirby fans, that at the heart of the Marvel Universe is the Fantastic Four, and that for many of us, and I believe Jack Kirby would agree, Ben Grimm was Jack Kirby. He had the soul of Jack Kirby. Big blue-eyed Benji was the heart of Marvel. And it's unfortunate that we haven't had a good Fantastic Four movie because we really need one. But let me just say this, now that Disney has purchased 20th Century Fox, maybe we'll get the Fantastic Four FF integrated into the Marvel Universe, which is something that big fans of the Fantastic Four, of which I am one, have been dying to see. But let's get to Sky Masters of the Space Force. Sky Masters of the Space Force was a strip that ran for a little under 2.5 years. And Jack Kirby had always wanted to have his own comic strip. He had worked on comic strips in the 30s, the mid-30s, in a nominal way. But one of the things that strip artists had was they had a national audience. They got a byline, and their work was taken much more seriously than comic book artists. As a matter of fact, in Europe, then as now, comic strips are considered to be art. Comic books are now as well, but they weren't held in high esteem in the United States at that time. And I'm talking about comic books. But Jack Kirby got an opportunity working with the Wood brothers, Dave and Dick Wood, to create Sky Masters of the Space Force. And the history of that is rather convoluted and complex. And I discuss it in the essay in the book. Let's just make it quick. Jack Schiff, who was an editor at DC Comics, got an offer from a syndicate to do a strip. Actually, they went to him. They said, can DC provide us with a strip? Schiff went to the powers that be at DC Comics, the people that owned it. They said they weren't particularly interested. They said, if you want to do it, that's fine. Jack Schiff turned to his freelance staff. He talked to one of the Wood brothers and said, would you be interested in doing this? Jack Kirby got involved in it. Jack Kirby had already been working on doing a space strip with Marv Stein and the Woods, and which is very, very different. And I discussed that in the essay. So you got to read the essay in order to get all the good stuff. Anyway, what happened was when the deal was made to do the strip, Jack Kirby made a deal with Schiff to give him a percentage of the monies paid by the syndicate. And there's an argument as to what happened, but if you read the transcripts over, it's very clear that Kirby signed an agreement, which he did not follow through with. He was sued by Jack Schiff. Jack Schiff won the lawsuit. Kirby had to pay the royalties along with the Wood brothers. And that put a bad taste in Jack Kirby's mouth, and he was never particularly happy about Sky Masters after that, and for years didn't want to talk about it. So now that we have a brief history of Sky Masters, let's look at the really important part, which is the strip. Now, first of all, Sky Masters has been reprinted a couple of times, and it's been reprinted, I believe, in Italy, and it's been reprinted it was reprinted in the United States 3 times, I believe. It was reprinted by a smaller company in 1980. It was reprinted by Greg Theekson in the early 90s, and then in 2000 he reprinted the entire strip. And I think Greg did a pretty good job. Our book is different because it uses different source material. It reproduces the strips in a larger format and is structured differently in terms of the construction of the book because it's an art book. And I've always admired Greg's book. I think it's a very good book. The problem is it's out of print and very expensive if you try to buy it. This particular book is a mass market book. It's available on our website. It's available through down in comic book distributors, and it's available in comic book shops and stores everywhere. This is an important strip because it brings together the talents of Wallace Wood, at the height of his power, in the late 50s, when he had just about finished doing his really fantastic science fiction work for EC Comics, and we discussed that in here, as well as Jack Kirby, who was getting ready to create the Marvel Universe. And so let's take a look at the strips. The strips combine 2 very unlikely artists. Jack Kirby, who was a forced perspective artist who threw energy and power right in your face constantly, and Wally Wood, who was an extremely elegant inker who used a lot of spotting blacks and shadow effects and used zipatone frequently in order to achieve these effects. This is these are the strips, as you can see. Now this is the dailies only. The dailies ran from 1958 to 1961. We used 5 different sources, which included about 10% of the book is taken from scans from original art. So the book produces 3 strips a page. These strips are roughly 1/2 the size of the original artwork. And the book has an essay, which I wrote, which details the history of Jack Kirby in context with Sky Masters. Here's, for instance, a picture of this is the actual artwork that was prepared for the original promotional for Sky Masters. Together with a Johnny Reb Sunday that Jack Kirby was working on in the same time period. This is an unpublished pencils-only Sunday where he penciled the entire Sunday strip. And this, incidentally, along with the Surf Hunter Daily underneath it, which was inked by Wally Wood, was supplied by none other than Mitch Itkowitz from Graphic Collectibles. And a big shout out and thank you very much for Mitch for letting us use these images, which are in his groundbreaking and very important tome, Jack Kirby Masterworks. And we could do an hour on Jack Kirby Masterworks, but I won't. But it's a phenomenal book. It's out of print. I believe it's the first serious book that was ever done about Jack Kirby's artwork, and Mitch Itkowitz went to Jack Kirby and worked with him. And it is a great book, a thing of beauty. It's a huge book. The printing quality is incredible. I can't say enough about that book. It's if you love Jack Kirby, you have to have that book. And Hermes Press didn't publish it. It was published by Mitch. Here are examples of original artwork to show you what it looked like. Here's some of the covers that Jack did when he was working at DC Comics. It goes without saying that after he lost the lawsuit, he wasn't working for DC Comics anymore. Here's a picture of original art from a Challenger's page to show you the similarities in the way the material was being handled. This was inked by Wally Wood, as was the strip. And then, of course, I'll show you portions of the strips. You can see how big they are. Not all of these strips are 100% perfect because we used 5 different sources toward the tail end of the strip. There were quality problems in the reproduction of the tear sheets themselves, so we had to do a lot of digital reconstruction. Prior editions of this book have used the advanced press proofs, which were circulated in order to sell the strip. We didn't use the advanced press proofs. We either used original art press proofs or tear sheets. So everything in this book is entirely consistent. You'll note in some versions of the Sky Masters books, he's referred to as Sky Cannon, and Sky Cannon was one of the names that was originally knocked around for the character. And in some of the reprints of this book, he's referred to as Sky Cannon for the first 2 or 3 weeks. Our book is completely consistent. He's always Sky Masters in our book. The other thing that's omitted frequently because they used the proofs were the dates on the strips at the beginning for the first 3 or 4 weeks. This book has everything in continuity. Everything is consistent. Everything is as the strips would have been. And as I said, not all of these strips are perfect because your reproduction is as good as the material that you can get. Although I would say from looking at the other books, this book has the largest version of the strips and the best reproduction of any of the Sky Masters books. This is the definitive ultimate version. The back cover has a piece of original art. Let's talk about Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby was arguably one of the most important comic artists of the 20th century. I don't think there's anybody who worked during the Golden Age or the Silver Age who wasn't aware of Jack Kirby, wasn't aware of his talent, and wasn't influenced by him. And it goes without saying that we would not have modern comic books without the Marvel Universe and Jack Kirby. It goes without saying that Superman was created by Siegel and Schuster and was shopped around and published in Action 1. And there were a number of knockoffs of Superman. Captain America, which came out right on the tail end of Superman being created, is an equally important, significant character who's very original, who predates the United States entering the Second World War, who's created by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon. And the energy in the original Captain America strips is incredible because Jack Kirby went from admiring Milton Caniff and Alex Raymond and Hal Foster and Elliot Gould, the strip artists, and he fused all of this together because he had no formal art education. He fused all of this together to create his own inimitable style, which really makes its powerful appearance in the Captain America strips published by Timely under Martin Goodman. And Jack was involved in the first 10 issues of that. Then they had issues about royalties and ownership, and they left. Simon and Kirby left and went on to do other things for DC Comics. But Sky Masters is an interesting point in Jack Kirby's career because it's the interim period between when he came back from the Second World War, did romance comics, did science fiction comics, worked in a lot of different genres, did Western comics, and then went to work for DC doing science and horror and mystery, and of course, most importantly, Challengers of the Unknown, which is a precursor to really what Marvel was going to do when he got there and started to work with Stan Lee. And of course, we have to remember that this book not only gives you Sky Masters, it's also in many ways a celebration of the 100th anniversary of Jack Kirby, because Jack Kirby was born in 1917 and this is 2017, so it's his 100th birthday. Normally when we do books, we do not have available original artwork, and in this case we did. And we used a lot of the original artwork that we had access to in the book instead of using proofs or tear sheets, because if you have the original material, it's going to look better because we can scan it rather than shoot it photographically, so there's no you don't lose image generation from generation. Originally, I'll give you an example. This is what an original Sky Masters daily looks like. And actually this one, the first panel is reproduced on the back panel of this book. You can see it was actually scanned right from this. When you scan these images at 600 dots per inch, you get pretty much an absolute reproduction, which is more or less a digital counterpart of this strip. Whereas in production in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, these would be shot photographically, and then they would have a color guide, and it would be shot again, and it would go down several generations before it was printed in the comic. Then it would be reduced in size, and when it was printed in the comic book. So you have a loss of line and a loss of detail as you go from generation to generation. You don't have that with digital. You don't have that with scanning. So this is one of the Skymaster's dailies that we used in the production of this book. And there's another one. You'll notice that the second panel is the cover image. Rather, the first panel is the cover image. This was scanned and then it was digitally colored so that we could create the cover of the book. And here's the cover of the book. And here's the original art. You'll also notice that the original art is much larger than a lot of people. Original art collectors know it's big. These pieces are about 7 by 20 inches. And here's another Skymaster's daily using a lot of Zipatone with a lot of shading effects, a lot of spotting blacks by Wally Wood. Here is another Skymaster's daily. This contains a very important character, Mayday. There's one of the first continuities is involving her. She's an important, very aggressive female journalist and is a heroine. And she pops up in the Skymaster's continuities. So you have Skymasters and you have Mayday in this particular original. And I'm going to show you 2 more originals. Skymasters is an interesting period piece because it was created during the space race when our rockets were exploding on the pad and the Russians were orbiting Sputnik, and you could hear Sputnik every so often. It would go beep, 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 and you would hear Sputnik, and Americans were very nervous about that because the Russians had entered the space race before we had. Our rockets kept blowing up. Finally, we got a man in space, and of course, obviously, we won the space race, but nuclear war and the race in space were 2 things that were on just about every American family's minds. And this strip dealt with the space race, which was very, very popular and very interesting to audiences at that time. And add into the mixture, science fiction was popular, but not as popular as it is now, with movies like Forbidden Planet, which came out in 1956, and This Island Earth. But one of the movies that was influential on Skymasters was created by Chesley Bonestell. Chesley Bonestell was an artist that every kid that grew up in the 50s and 60s knew about because he painted pictures of what other planets would look like, the surfaces of other planets, what the Earth would look like from Mercury, what all the planets looked like, what spaceships would look like in the future. And he was responsible for the design of a movie called Conquest of Space, which was produced by George Powell. And if you watch Conquest of Space and you look at the rockets and the space stations and the spacesuits and the insignias, you'll notice that they were very influential in Skymasters. Here's another Skymasters daily. Now, believe it or not, this is one of my favorite Skymasters dailies. As a matter of fact, I own this particular Skymasters daily, and I lent it to the Jewish Museum when they had a show in 2007. And I remember when I bought this, I bought it because of, if you look at the first panel, there's a rose floating over Skymasters. And I found that to be really, really elegant. A lot of you are probably not familiar with Ellsworth Kelly, but Ellsworth Kelly was a very important 20th century abstract painter, post-Second World War New York school painter, who simplified down forms into an emblem, usually 1 or 2 elements, figure and a ground element. But he also would draw these incredibly simple drawings of roses, flowers, fruit, things like that. Were very, very, very simple. Not abstract, but just stripped down to the bare essentials. he was doing those in the 50s, 56, 57, 58, 59, through the 60s. He was doing them actually for his entire career after the late 50s. But this rose struck me, if you look at it carefully, as being elegantly abstract and yet still a rose. And the way Wally Wood inked it was incredibly right on point. And I think the whole strip encapsulates Jack Kirby's talent. You have all of these characters talking to each other. You have the action moving from panel to panel. You have you have the illusion of detail created by spotting blacks, positive and negative space, which you can see in the second panel, and then you have the marvelous third panel with the zipatone effects, with this rose floating over Sky Masters. And I realized he had just been hallucinating, and he thought it was a monster, and it transformed into a rose. I don't think I'm giving too much away by telling you this. So this was the genius of Wally Wood and Jack Kirby coming together. This is, I think, a strip that's archetypal of comic books and comic strips. And we used the last panel as the last page in the book, with the general saying, "Postpone Project Space Wheel." Very, very kitschy in a lot of ways, but very, very consistent with the times, the late 50s. So if you like science fiction and you like the mindset of the late 50s, early 60s in this is what space exploration will look like, and you like the positive, optimistic attitude of that time, and you like the work of Jack Kirby, and who in his right mind doesn't like the work of Jack Kirby, inked by Wallace Wood, who was one of the great inkers in comic books, you can't go wrong with this book. And I will say that a number of people were involved in this book, and I don't usually mention everybody, but I want a big shout out for the following people. First of all, Troy Musquire and Alyssa Fisher worked to get these images correct. I was also involved in photoshopping these images. These images were also worked on by Sabrina Herman, our managing editor, and they were also worked on by Candace Hartner. So you had all these people working on this book to make it just right. The cover was colored by Alyssa Fisher, and I think she did a great job. The other thing that we did with the Sky Masters logo was we didn't change it, but we subtly redesigned it. This logo was recreated and spiffed up in Illustrator by Alyssa Fisher, who did a great job, and it's used throughout the book. And normally Sky appears above Masters. I preferred this presentation of the logo, so it was designed this way. And it was kept consistent with the feel of the strip from that era. So we didn't change it significantly, but I think it looks better this way. That's my opinion. If you don't agree, well, you have your right not to agree. So in summary, this is the complete Sky Masters Dailies, reproduced on 120 grams per meter matte art book paper, Smythe sewn. If you look here, you see the book opens. You don't hear that cracking sound. Opens completely flat. The production of this book is top notch. The strips have as much detail as you could possibly get. About 10% of the strips are reproduced from originals, so you're going to see detail in a lot of these strips that you've never seen before. We used tear sheets that were very, very significantly worked on to make sure that they looked really, really good. A lot was put into this book, and I hope people buy it, appreciate it, and enjoy it, and I like it, and I believe it's the definitive work on a very important strip historically, and a lot of fun, and a strip that I have personally admired for close to 40 years. So that's all for now. Any questions, email me at daniel@hermespress.com. The book is obviously printed. It's in transit from our printer in China. We expect to have it in toward the end of December. It'll be available in January. That's all for now. Bye-bye.